I want to welcome to the program Mike Spies. He is a staff writer at The Trace and a contributor to the New Yorker magazine, where your pieces on the NRA have been running in both places. Welcome to the program, Mike. And I will say, on this very week, there have been new revelations, leaked letters that suggest that Wayne LaPierre has been living very, very large. He, of course, is the executive director. Is that it of the NRA?
He's the executive vice president and CEO of the NRA. Yeah.
So, okay. So let's backtrack, and we'll I guess we'll circle back around to LaPierre's excessive spending, because this sort of your work points to some extent where the money is coming from and how it's being spent. But one of the things I found shocking about your piece is that the NRA has been in financial trouble for what seems like multiple decades.
Yeah, and for generally the same reason, which is that it's been under Wayne LaPierre's leadership, it's been engaging in endless profligate spending, mostly for the purpose of self-dealing enrichment for a small group of vendors, contractors, senior management officials, folks that have ultimately, over the last few decades, extracted hundreds of millions of dollars from the organization's coffers.
And all right, so let's walk through this. Like, how has this taken place? I mean, where did the wheels where did the things start going off the track? And I guess, I remember in the early 90s when George Herbert Walker Bush publicly resigned from the NRA, largely because of Wayne LaPierre. I mean, what is that around the time that the organization changed?
Well, he did resign from Wayne LaPierre because of a fundraising letter that he signed, which was, of course, created by one of the NRA's vendors. And I believe that vendor was a firm that has morphed now into different entities that are still paid by the NRA, and that firm is called PM Direct. And yes, it was around that time. Wayne LaPierre ascended to the NRA's top post in 1991, and it seems like that was when the business started to go sideways. Board members themselves started to get sort of caught into the problems, within the first 5 years of his leadership. You could see in board minutes we obtained from that period that they were admitting, very frankly, that they were, even at that time in 1996, in deep financial trouble. They'd been insolvent for a number of years. They were overly leveraged. And one of the major problems was that they were just unable, frankly, to rein in Wayne's spending. And much of Wayne LaPierre's spending was going toward public relations, ultimately promoting him and building his image and that sort of thing. And they were specifically calling out a firm that's been involved with the NRA's business for going back to the early 80s, but took on a far more prominent role once Wayne became the top leader.
All right, well, let's talk about that history, because it's fascinating, and it also, let's go through the history, and then I want to maybe just get your assessment to the extent that you feel comfortable. I mean, I know you report on this stuff, so what you're talking about is stuff that you have found either documentary or sort of through interviews. But I'm just sort of there does feel like there's a part of the story that's sort of missing as of yet. I mean, Wayne LaPierre is spending all this money ostensibly promoting himself, but within an agency that he's staying in, right? Like, it's, so if you're threatening the solvency of that vehicle in a way to promote yourself, even though you're staying in that vehicle, there's some other dynamic maybe that's going on. But before we get there, where did this dynamic of this, what appears to be on some level, some measure of self-dealing, where did that start?
Well, I can at least only speak to, again, charting it back to the rise of LaPierre to the NRA's top post. And I think, what we're getting at right now is the NRA's fundamental relationship, the relationship that built the modern NRA, and that is its relationship with this firm, Ackerman McQueen, that became crucial for Wayne LaPierre. It essentially, I mean, Wayne, by anyone's description who knows him, is not just mild-mannered. People call him meek, serious introvert. He is not the person that you encounter in public. And the NRA, of course, had aspirations to become this very strong national organization, putting itself on the front lines of an issue that it ultimately created, that of gun rights. So it needed to professionalize its messaging. It brings on this PR firm, Ackerman McQueen. Ackerman essentially concocts Wayne LaPierre's persona out of whole cloth. And over time, the firm and the organization have become sort of inextricably intertwined. Now, I hesitate. That means, among other things, that there's been quite literally a revolving door between the two places. Executives that worked at one now work at the other, and vice versa. Internal documents that I obtained specifically say that roughly 25% of the NRA staff are managed by former Ackerman McQueen personnel. There's just been an incredible exchange of money. That being said, what has sort of happened over time is the blame has been placed on the firm itself, which is not quite right. I mean, the firm is doing what the firm is supposed to do, which is to make a profit, and as much profit as it can, and it's doing this off of a client. Now, the issue is, of course, the willing client that has that bought into this relationship and ultimately allowed it to become what it is, which is sort of the apparatus that produces the vast majority of the organization's messaging. So, as I've said before, when you, the average person, are encountering the NRA, or you believe you are in media, you're really encountering this firm. And that, means Dana Lash, Colleen Noir, any of the leading personalities. These are folks who are Ackerman McQueen people. NRA TV is Ackerman McQueen produced, conceived, and I'm just talking about, the current moment, but some of the most famous ad campaigns of, going back to the period you're talking about in the 90s, the I'm the NRA campaign, I mean, that's also an Ackerman McQueen creation. So you have executives at the NRA who also have stakes in Ackerman-related entities. Although to be clear, so you're talking about where the self-dealing starts. That's some of it, but it extends far beyond that. You have a number of people that have a number of conflicts of interest with, a series of firms that the NRA pays money to.
Okay, so all right, and so there's almost like two major, I guess, silos of issues, right? From the perspective, at the very least, of critics of the NRA. One is sort of the problem with the sort of the substance of their work, which you touched on in part, was the sort of the creation of this mentality around gun rights, which they have now extended to a sort of virulent form of social conservatism that doesn't really have much to do with gun rights necessarily, but is, I guess, sort of an expansion of the things that are theoretically on the table for the tribe around gun rights. And then there's also sort of the operations of the entity, which there's multiple issues there, and you've done work in the past in terms of their relationship to electioneering, but that there may be some self-dealing. So let's start on that sort of or continue on that sort of operations, because the whole issue is not so much that, I mean, I don't think it's that strange for an organization to have a PR firm. The question is, what is the nature of that relationship? Because we have an entity that takes tax-free contributions, right? That is theoretically supposed to be geared towards promoting. Well, what you tell us, their charter, in terms of the way they're chartered with the IRS, what are they supposed to be doing?
Well, they're supposed to, it's called the 501c4 under the tax code. They're tax exempt, and under the tax code, they keep their tax exempt status by promoting social welfare. Nobody is supposed to get rich off of a nonprofit. So that is one of the fundamental issues. Certainly nothing wrong. Again, I don't want to make this too much about the PR firm because it's one thing, but it's the NRA's problem. It's not the firm's problem. The firm's job is to get the business that it can get. The issue is just the amount of money that gets moved from the nonprofit to that firm, and along with many others, or a small handful of others. So in 2017 alone is the figure that many have heard right now. The money that, some 12% of the NRA's total expenses went to that one firm. That came to more than $40 million. That becomes the issue. Is a nonprofit, should it be operating as almost like a pass-through entity for other for-profit entities or people? I mean, to move off of that, there are these folks who worked in senior management for a number of years at the NRA. They leave, but then they end up staying on as consultants. And I say consultants with quotes because it's just what they do is not really clear, but they get paid many hundreds of thousands of dollars every year. Those are just people, so it's just individuals. There are executives who are, who are getting contracts for their dads, their wives, they're making payments to firms that employ their wives, hiring former friends from other problematic businesses. Like it just there's an endless number of these issues, and what the documents that we have show is that the main problem, perhaps, is that so much of these problematic transactions are in many ways being disguised from the NRA's own accountants. Like they're the ones who have produced these memos that I've obtained, and what they started in earnest sounding the alarms about last summer were, we're paying, like, for example, $1.8 million for quote unquote rental of a house from that belongs to the owner of a business that we contract with. We have no idea why we've done that. And this is just one example of many examples, where this keeps on playing out. And we're in this terrible financial state right now. And what the documents seem to say, and what the accounts are saying, is we've driven ourselves here. We've created this by making it this situation in which we're kind of almost operating as a piggy bank that we've allowed people just to sort of willy-nilly put their hands in and take money out of.
And just to be clear, it's the nonprofit which collects the money tax-free
Right.
is, in many respects, managed by the same people who end up being the private entities who are outside of the nonprofit who get paid. So it's not necessarily double dipping going on, but at least temporarily no double dipping, right?
In some cases it is double dipping. I mean, you have someone who, for example, in 2016, this particular person was managing the NRA's affinity relationships. So that means, the NRA lends its brand to a number of products, different kinds of insurance products, that kind of thing, and then they get paid like a royalty fee through that. And one of the insurance brokers it worked with is called Locked In Affinity to carry out those relationships. Just to give you an example, this particular person retired at the end of 2015. This person then stayed on a couple weeks into 2016 in order to collect a base salary for like $28,000. The reason for doing that is that it would then, because the person in theory had been employed at all during that year, it would allow that person then to collect a bonus from the NRA, which was worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. And at the same time, and the accountants didn't know this, that person was also collecting hundreds of thousands of dollars in payments from Locked In, the vendor that was working with the NRA on those affinity relationships. So, double dipping. And they're like you said, that's just one illustration.
And so, and I want to talk about that, those type of insurances like Carry Guard, for instance,
right.
in a moment. But how does someone like that individual, is it possible for an individual like that to operate in that way in a rogue fashion? In other words, you say like the accountants don't know this stuff,
right.
but And I've worked in some companies where there does seem to be sort of a quiet understanding of people looking around going like, I'm not going to say anything if you don't say anything. And there's I don't know how,
Right.
What's your sense of that?
Well, no, the sense is that this is not, I mean, it's, we've enumerated a number of examples that show this kind of thing, and that's really where the story is an accretion of details. But what the documents show, and these are a vast collection of both public and private documents, is that this is a purely systemic issue. This is an institutional problem. And the institutional problem is that this is an institution that's marked by secrecy, self-dealing, and greed. And all of these various arrangements, whether they be conflicts of interest or other payouts, lavish pay packages, bloated pay packages, gratuitous payments, it's all part of the same. It's all part of the same problem. It happens because it seems like people have just sort of accepted the idea that this is acceptable corporate behavior.
And it seems to me that the implications for society are that what appears to be ideologically motivated is really just sort of a money grab, and they're creating. It's almost as if they're creating markets, like an ideological market based upon just because they're making money off it. I mean, it's a grift.
Well, that is over time what it starts to look like. I mean, I have to obviously be careful, and I can't personally make any kind of declaration like that. But certainly, yeah, I mean, it raises the most important questions, which is what you're getting at. And those are, or maybe that is, maybe just one question is this organization really about creating a movement, whatever you take the gun rights movement to mean? Whatever that means to you, is that really its central purpose, or is really the purpose of creating a movement to enrich a small group of people, specifically vendors, contractors, senior management folks, or really just folks, senior management and people who have a relationship with senior management? And obviously that is highly problematic for all the obvious reasons. One, the NRA is a tax-exempt and therefore tax-subsidized organization. So all of us American taxpayers are subsidizing the NRA just like we subsidize all 501c4s. And then it is an organization that has a very outsized influence on our politics, particularly an issue that is a matter of life and death, right? I mean, this is something that touches all of our lives in some way or other. And it's sort of almost unthinkable to imagine that all of this carnage and bloodshed has really not been about ideology. It's been about making money. And that is the way it starts to feel the more paper you accumulate.
Tell us about CarryGuard, because that seems to be an exemplar of a product that was sort of almost created out of an ideological movement in some way, right? And that doesn't necessarily serve any purpose other than enriching the people who sell it.
Right. I mean, so I guess to speak to that, to define it first, CarryGuard has two facets. And the first one, which I'll talk about, is the one that really matters, and that is it's a program that provides insurance or self-defense insurance for people who it would, if you purchase it, it would in theory, it's supposed to cover your legal costs in a criminal proceeding in the event that you shoot someone and claim self-defense. So, obviously, to most people, that is just on its face objectionable. The idea that you would, that's why it's been dubbed by activist groups as murder insurance, which is not, it's not a perfectly accurate characterization, but it's certainly close enough that it works and it makes sense. I mean, it's a the idea that you could go out and purchase insurance in advance of shooting someone is obviously not something that any regulators want for incentive for just the incentives alone. And
right.
so quite obvious. So that product launched, was conceived around the 2016 election, and it became much more important after Trump won, because one, the NRA had already been in a deep financial hole, but then spent way more than it had on the 2016 elections, more than $50 million, a good portion of that in the service of electing Trump, but not all of it. So Trump gets elected, that means that they're not going to be able to fundraise off of a Democratic president who's going to take your guns away, right? That's a big problem. That changes it changes everything. It's the exact opposite of what you had in Barack Obama, who became a very convenient, boogeyman. So Carry Guard internally was marketed as a way to sort of safeguard the NRA's financial future, and it was supposed to place it on a new path to prosperity.
It's a hedge, right? I mean, it's a perfect hedge. Right. If we don't have somebody who's going to take away our guns, we can market the fact that we're going to have the more freedom to kill people in self-defense.
Right.
And
well, that's right. No, you're totally right. It also is. There's in your perfect hedge. It's also very much part of very vertical integration, right? The NRA created the stand your ground philosophy. So it's also telling its people, if you accept the idea that stand your ground is legitimate, and you're going to get into the situation where you may need to have to use your gun in self-defense, you don't want to also then you don't want to be depleted by legal costs. So here's this product. You've satisfied both ends of the market. You've created a demand, and now you're going to satisfy the demand. In theory, that's how it's supposed to work. Of course, there were a number of folks within the organization who said this is a horrible idea. It is not going to stand up to scrutiny, and we shouldn't do it. And according to documents, those people were quote-unquote intimidated into silence. So product goes to market in April of 2017, and almost immediately, within a few months, not only gets just slammed by activists across the country, and because they work so aggressively marketing the product, but immediately falls under the regulatory scrutiny of the state of New York, and which found last spring, or I guess now 2 springs ago, in May of 2018, that it obviously broke several New York rules, which meant that it could not be sold here. And New York is the most important insurance market in the country. It also sort of sets the standard for guidelines and regulations. So a number of states have very similar, if not the same, guidelines and regulations. And that basically meant, well, if it's not going to work in New York, it's probably not going to work in a lot of other places too, which has proven to be the case. It's also, been shut down in California and several other states, and I'm sure there are going to be a lot more. So it's been a massive disaster. It's put the NRA further into a hole, because that program, the amount of money that was spent on promoting it, creating it, everything else, and then of course the litigation has only and greatly exacerbated the NRA's financial woes.
Would tell us why New York is so prominent. I'm fascinated by this. It has to do with the founding of the NRA, and why New York seems to have an outsized influence, not just because of insurance regulation. They sort of function in the insurance realm like California does with cars. But
that's right.
But they have the Attorney General in New York State has even more power, because why?
Well, the NRA is chartered in New York. It was founded here after the Civil War, and its purpose, and this is good to remind everybody of, was to seed a culture of marksmanship. It was founded by former Union soldiers who were dismayed that they were so outshot by their Southern counterparts. And so the mission, and it remained this way, the core mission was supposed to be, gun education, safety, training, that sort of thing. It's obviously gotten quite far away from that. At any rate, they never left New York. They remained chartered here. They could have, they didn't. And now, because they are chartered in New York, they fall under the regulatory purview of the New York Attorney General, who, since our stories have come out, has opened, not surprisingly, an investigation into the organization's status as a nonprofit here.
And we should say that your earlier work led to complaints that were filed with the FEC They were ignored. I believe there's a lawsuit that was filed in the past couple of weeks to the against the FEC for not acting upon these complaints. This week, leaked documents show that Wayne LaPierre has been very liberal, if you will, with the spending. And just a couple of weeks ago, there was a big sort of public rift between Oliver North and Wayne LaPierre. Well, give me your sense of where this is all headed.
I mean, it seems like it's headed toward a complete implosion. I mean, what's happening is just everyone is trying to stay alive. So it's a game of survival now, and factions have been formed, factions that have in some ways been forming over a period of time, and each is trying to just take out the other. I mean, Oliver North, who in theory had his own conflict of interest in that while he was president, and I think they were using this against him, he was getting paid by the PR firm we were talking about earlier. The question is that the NRA has since alleged, and I think this was done to push him out, has since alleged that somehow the details of that contract were kept from the organization, which doesn't really make any sense, or at least certainly defies credulity. But one of the leaked things that came out was that the law firm Brewer and Associates, which has been litigating for the NRA and handling a number of things for the organization, has made an incredible. I mean, they've in the 13 or 14 months they've been working for the organization, they've made something like $24 million. And as of currently, and according to those documents, Q1 of 2019, the NRA has been paying the firm more than $97,000 a day.
Wow, that seems.
Just let that sink in. What that means. I mean, by any standard, that sounds utterly insane. But again, currently, this is like in Q1 of 2019. What these documents say, that firm has been getting paid more than $97,000 per day.
I mean, coming from a family of attorneys, just like the idea of like. There are, even if it's $1,000 an hour per person firm, right? 97 hours of man hours a day. You have 5. I mean, you'd have to have 10 attorneys working 10 hours a day every day on your case. That sounds like a lot. I suspect that's going to be a focus of a future story. Well, Mike Spies, the piece is in the New Yorker. I can't recommend it enough, and for folks to follow your work there and at the Trace as this evolves, because I have a feeling we're about to. Some of this is going to be get rather messy or more messy, I guess, soon.